Okay, so you sent over this really interesting PDF guide about tantric sex. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive.
It is.
Yeah.
And, when most people hear Tantra, I think, well, their mind goes straight to the bedroom, right?
Almost always, yeah.
Yeah,
But this guide, it really tries to unpack something much bigger, much richer than just, the physical stuff.
right. So that's what we're doing today. This deep dive isn't just going to be like a list of techniques
No, definitely not. We're going to pull out the core ideas from the guide, you know, where Tantra actually comes from, the spiritual side of things.
and how maybe the modern Western view only gets like a tiny piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. Think of it as the efficient way to get genuinely clued in on what Tantra is really about beyond the hype.
So our mission here, taking our cue from you wanting to get the info quickly but properly,
Uh-huh.
is to boil down the key insights from this guide. We want everyone listening to get a solid grasp of Tantra's origins, its main concepts, and how it might, help with personal growth or relationships.
Without feeling totally overwhelmed by dense texts.
Exactly. And yeah, the guide does get into intimacy, but we're starting, well, at the beginning with the basics.
Which makes sense because the guide itself tackles that common misconception straight away. It says, look, sex is part of the conversation for some, but the roots are way broader.
Okay, let's jump in then. Chapter 1 of the guide kicks off by defining Tantra. It goes back to the Sanskrit root, tan.
Right, tan meaning to weave or to form.
And what struck me there was how that simple word already points to this deep link Tantra sees between, well, our bodies and our spirit. They're woven together.
And it's interesting how that core idea, that weaving, shows up in all the different ways Tantra gets interpreted in the old Indian texts.
The guide lists things like discipline, rituals,
Yes.
essence.
Alpha science.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just one single thing.
No, more like a family of related ideas and practices.
And the guide breaks down some key components you often find. Things like asana yoga poses, many know, mantra, pranayama, the breath stuff, reflection, and various rituals. And it stresses that these pieces are mixed and matched differently depending on the specific tantric tradition.
Which kind of explains how Tantra has touched so many different spiritual paths. Shaivism, Buddhism, Vaishnavism, Jainism. The guide lists them.
And it makes a really crucial distinction here. It's not just yoga for sex. That's a huge oversimplification.
Right. Or even a religion itself, although it clearly shaped many religious practices.
Exactly. The guide is pretty clear. Yeah, there are mystical ideas, but the main goal seems to be spiritual growth through the body through understanding it.
And I found the Buddhist angle really interesting, the idea that Tantra could actually be a path to enlightenment.
Well, yeah, it tackles that whole question of desire, doesn't it? Buddhism generally aims to overcome desire to end suffering.
Right.
But the guide suggests Tantra offers this different route. You consciously experience desire, learn to work with it, instead of just trying to squash it down. It's about mindful engagement.
Interesting. And it's not all lofty spiritual goals either. The guide mentions practical stuff too, like helping couples deal with pressure.
Yeah, that performance tension it talks about.
Which, let's be honest, sounds pretty relevant for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Okay, so where'd this all begin? The guide dives into the origins next, and it admits, well, historians debate the exact starting point.
Yeah, it says you see it clearly in texts around the 6th century CE.
But then it throws out this intriguing possibility maybe it goes way, way back. Like Bronze Age, Indus Valley Civilization, around 2000 BC.
Whoa, okay. That's ancient. And the guide paints a picture of that Harappan culture. Things like early bathrooms in houses.
The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, which sounds like maybe some kind of ritual bathing.
And lots of these female figures, like mother goddess statues, it suggests women might have had a pretty central role.
And that's a key contrast the guide makes. It suggests that maybe in that early context, women could even be Tantra teachers, which wasn't always the standard later on in Hinduism, for instance.
Interesting. Okay, so then the guide lays out these two main streams within Tantra, Dakshinachara and Vamachara.
Right, often called right-hand or white Tantra and left-hand or red Tantra.
So what's the difference, according to the guide? White Tantra first.
Okay, Dakshinachara, the right-hand path. It's more, let's say, conventional. It emphasizes things like ascetic practices, meditation, focusing inward. It's an individual journey, really, about purifying the mind.
And the guide mentions Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Kundalini Yoga, Kriya Yoga as examples fitting this mold.
Yeah, those often align with that focus on personal sort of mental and spiritual discipline.
And then the other one, Vamachara, Red Tantra. That sounds Different.
It is quite different, yeah. The guide describes it involving more ritual, engaging with the material world, even sexual instincts. It mentions the use of things like alcohol and ritualized sex as ways to connect with the divine.
Ritualized sex.
And the guide notes that for followers of this path, that sacred union could potentially be experienced with any partner, regardless of gender.
So both paths use sexual energy, but differently.
That's what the guide suggests. Red Tantra seems to view sexuality as a sacred ritual tool for deep connection with a partner and ultimately the divine. White Tantra, it's more about channeling that energy internally, often in solitary practice.
And the red path is seen as maybe faster.
The guide does mention it's often considered a more direct or accelerated path to liberation, but probably more intense too.
Okay. And then there's this term, maithuna, the sexual ritual. The guide clarifies something important here, right?
Yes, very important. It points out that while we associate Tantra heavily with Maithuna today, it wasn't necessarily the starting point or the main practice. It was often seen as a more advanced stage.
For experienced yogis who could handle it with the right mindset.
Exactly, with a specific meditative awareness, not just casual sex. So it's not the entry-level thing people might think.
Which brings us nicely to Neo-Tantra, which the guide also discusses.
Right. It talks about how Tantra really took off in the West, maybe around the 60s, 70s, coinciding with the sexual revolution, women's liberation.
And this Western version, Neo-Tantra, it took inspiration, but shifted the focus quite a bit.
Yeah, the guide draws a clear line. Traditional Tantra often aimed for, enlightenment, big spiritual goals. Neo-Tantra, especially as it developed in the West, tends to focus much more on the sexual experience itself, achieving better orgasms.
And the sources are different too. Modern books versus ancient texts.
Often, yes. And the guide mentions Neo-Tantra usually doesn't require a guru, that traditional teacher figure who's pretty essential in classical Indian or Tibetan Tantra.
So this explains that common mix-up the guide mentioned earlier, confusing Tantra as a whole with just Tantric sex.
Exactly. The guide really hammers this home. Traditional Tantra is fundamentally about weaving energy, uniting masculine and feminine principles within, often through meditation, breathwork. Doesn't automatically mean sex.
So Tantric sex is more like applying those broader Tantric ideas to sex.
Precisely. Taking that focus on energy, on union, on presence, and bringing it into sexual intimacy. The goal isn't just orgasm, but a deeper connection, feeling more present, maybe even something sacred in the experience.
And the guide mentions an interesting side note that maybe Neo-Tantra was sometimes promoted by India in the mid to late 20th century to get Western attention.
Yeah, it touches on that possibility, a kind of cultural diplomacy angle perhaps, adds another layer to how it became so popular.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift to chapter 2 then, the link between Tantra and spirituality. The guide starts by framing Tantra as a spiritual lifestyle, really.
A path to freedom, seeing the body and nature as divine energy.
And it emphasizes sexual energy as this powerful force, potentially for spiritual growth. It even quotes a tantric text, the Guhya Samasha Tantra.
Right, saying liberation comes not from, torturing yourself, but from consciously satisfying desires.
Which really flips the script on some ascetic ideas, doesn't it? It's about embracing the whole human experience.
Exactly. Integration, not denial.
And the guide lays out 3 core principles for this path: knowledge, renunciation, and concentration.
Yeah, basically. Understand more, suffer less by not clinging to outcomes, and focus your mind for better well-being. Pretty universal concepts, really.
And it connects these ideas to teachings from figures like Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, positioning Tantra as this sort of universal path.
It does. It even calls Tantric Yoga the esoteric form of the Buddhist path, the Vajrayana.
And bringing it back to relationships, the guide highlights how Tantra can potentially transform them by focusing on energy exchange, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, physical.
Right. It suggests this can really revitalize things, even long-term relationships, and help ease that performance anxiety we talked about, shifting focus from doing it right to just feeling and connecting.
And interestingly, it says it can help even if only one partner practices, especially women.
Yeah, the idea seems to be that working on your own energy and self-awareness has benefits regardless. It can shift your own experience, which naturally impacts the dynamic.
Okay. Now, also in chapter 2, the chakras. Big topic.
Huge. Yeah. The guide explains them as these spinning wheels of energy, basically, balancing mind and body.
And when they're balanced, you feel present, grounded. Imbalanced, you feel stuck, constrained.
Something like that. And the guide uses a nice analogy, like veins in a leaf, all connected, all drawing from the same source. Mess one up, It affects the whole system.
And there are 7 main ones, lined up along the spine, each linked to organs and colors.
Yep. Should we run through them quickly, as the guide does?
Yeah, let's do that. It starts at the base, the root chakra, Muladhara.
Muladhara, yeah. Red. All about grounding, security, basic needs. The guide also links it to intimacy and sex drive, our foundation.
Okay, then up to the sacral chakra, Swadhisthana.
Orange. This one's tied to sexual pleasure, creativity, emotions, healthy connections, joy, basically.
Next, solar plexus, Manipura, yellow.
This is our power center. Self-confidence, self-esteem, asserting ourselves, finding our center.
Then the heart chakra, Anahata, green.
The big one for love, compassion, empathy, emotional intelligence, how we give and receive love or hate.
Throat chakra next, Vishuddha, blue.
All about self-expression, speaking your truth, communicating clearly, verbally, and non-verbally.
Third eye, Ajna, indigo.
Intuition, insight, maybe even psychic stuff. Spiritual clarity, decision-making, balancing thoughts and emotions, seeing beyond the surface.
And finally, the crown chakra, Sahasrara, violet or white.
Our connection to the bigger picture, spirituality, transcending ego, self-love, peace, connection to the cosmos, pure consciousness.
Wow, so it's like a whole energy map of us.
Pretty much, and understanding this map is key to a lot of tantric practices aimed at finding balance.
Right. Moving to chapter 3, this idea of completing yourself with your partner. It starts by saying sex is often seen as sacred energy, right?
Yeah, across cultures, East and West, this primal force, the source of creation itself.
The guide points to examples in India, Tibet, China deities shown in union, linking the earthly and the divine. It's like the pulse of life.
And this leads into Shiva and Shakti, the 2 core principles in Tantra that make up Brahman, the ultimate reality.
Shiva is Purusa consciousness, unchanging. Shakti is Prakriti energy, dynamic. That's the gist.
That's the core, yeah. But crucially, the guide stresses they're not separate gods, but 2 sides of the same coin, inseparable aspects of the divine.
Shiva observes, Shakti acts.
Kind of. Shakti is the force that allows Shiva the potential to manifest. The guide mentions the 3 guna sattva, I exist, rajas, I act, tamas, I've acted, as how Shakti creates.
Interesting. It even briefly compares this to the Big Bang, consciousness versus matter origins. But back to Shiva and Shakti.
Right. Shiva as divine masculine energy, Shakti as divine feminine. And the key point, both energies are within everyone, regardless of gender.
And they have different qualities. Shiva is described as steadfast, peaceful.
An unmoved presence, yeah. While Shakti is dance, movement, power, sensuality, flexibility. She's the energy that shapes reality.
And this ties into yin and yang from Taoism.
The guide draws that parallel, yes. Both systems talk about balancing male and female energies, and it suggests the Taoist idea might have roots in the Indian concept of Ardhanarishvara, Shiva, and Shakti as one combined being.
Fascinating. So bringing us back to sex in Tantra, the goal is to harmonize these energies.
Yeah.
Within yourself and with your partner.
Exactly. For mutual elevation, deeper connection, and ultimately experiencing that highest pleasure, that feeling of oneness.
So during practice, the guide says you embody yang, masculine mindfulness, stability.
And yin feminine energy, like emotionality, changeability.
And harmonizing both your inner yin-yang and the outer yin-yang with your partner. That's this twofold elevation it talks about.
That seems to be the idea. It's an energetic and spiritual alignment, not just physical.
Okay, deep stuff. Let's jump ahead to chapter 6, which gets practical. Preparation for Tantric Sex. First thing it stresses.
Mutual desire. Absolutely critical. And open communication. This isn't something you spring on someone.
No, definitely not. The guide really emphasizes that Tantra takes time, preparation. Rushing or forcing it is a bad idea.
Totally counterproductive. Needs cooperation, shared intention.
So physical prep. The guide mentions things like yoga, meditation, breathing, but as ongoing practices, right? Not just a quick fix before sex.
Ideally, yeah. Building that body awareness over time. But also simpler things like showering, bathing together. Massage.
Massage.
Yeah.
The guide suggests that as a way to build intimacy separately from the main event, right? To avoid getting ahead of yourselves.
Exactly. Long baths, mutual massage, great for connection. But it highlights the need for feedback during the massage. What feels good, what doesn't. Constant communication.
And that communication needs to carry on during the sexual encounter too. Saying what you like, what you need, if something's not right.
Absolutely. No waiting till afterwards. Real-time feedback is key.
Okay, besides physical prep, atmosphere is important too. Setting the scene.
Definitely. Comfortable space bed, floor, cushions, whatever works. Soft lighting, it specifically says. Maybe avoid bright red. Could be agitating.
Interesting. And scent. Candles, incense, maybe scented sheets.
Yeah, creating a sensual mood. Calm, inviting. Oh, and it briefly mentions diet. Maybe a light, healthy meal beforehand, digested well. Avoid feeling sluggish or uncomfortable.
Right. So it's really about consciously creating the right setting, physically, emotionally, energetically.
Setting the stage properly, yeah.
Okay, chapter 7. The sensual touch. It starts by contrasting ordinary sex, where touch is often the main focus.
With tantric sex, where sometimes pleasure comes more from internal energy balancing, maybe even without much direct touch.
But the chapter does describe massage techniques, though it clarifies again, these are more for building intimacy, not necessarily foreplay right before intercourse.
Right, that's an important distinction it makes. These are practices in themselves.
So for both male, touching your Shiva, and female touching your Shakti massage, there are common elements.
Yeah, distraction-free zone, engaging all the senses, really understanding erogenous zones, using nice oils, almond, coconut, jojoba.
And this bliss breath, synchronized breathing.
Yes. The receiver inhales, focusing on taking in pleasure. The giver exhales, sending love through their touch. It's meant to deepen the energy connection.
Okay, for the male massage, the guide gets specific. Gentle touch on thighs, testicles, varying the strokes on the penis shaft.
Teasing towards orgasm, then backing off. And it mentions external and internal prostate stimulation, but with big warnings, right?
Absolutely. Lubrication, partner guidance, respect comfort levels, essential caveats.
Definitely. And for the female, or yoni massage, comfortable position, maybe a pillow under the hips.
Synchronized breathing again, warming oil on belly, breasts,
Nipples.
way, and various clitoral techniques, circles, push-pull, tug-roll, tapping. It also talks about finding the G-spot, that come here motion.
Right. And the potential for cervical uterine orgasm from deeper stimulation around the cervix.
And the overall goal of these massages, as the guide presents it, deep arousal, maybe multiple orgasms, sometimes without penetration at all.
So it's really a dedicated practice of sensual exploration and connection through touch.
Exactly. Intimacy building. Got it. Now, chapter 8, positions. This is probably what many people think of first.
Probably, yeah. The guide offers 25 options, saying you try these after the body and environment prep, and it notes difficulty is subjective.
Right. Depends on flexibility, strength, comfort. Let's maybe just touch on a few, give a flavor of the variety.
Sure. There's Yab-Yum, Father-Mother, or Lotus. Sitting facing, legs wrapped, big on energy exchange, eye contact, support.
Sidewinder, side lying, gentle hip movements for deeper stimulation. Padlock, leg lock, woman elevated, legs wrapped, good for clitoral focus.
Amazing butterfly, a variation of padlock, maybe a deeper pelvic tilt. Mermaid legs together, side lying, aligning genitals.
Double decker, both on backs, woman on top from behind, guide notes, G-spot access, maybe anal option.
Lap dance woman controls rhythm and depth. G-force woman knees to chest, aiming for deep G-spot angle. Waterfall woman on top, man's head torso off the bed, maybe amplifying sensation.
Passion pretzel, kneeling, facing, leaning in. Tub tangle for the bath, leg lock, kissing. Torrid tidal wave prone on the beach, clitoral rubbing focus. Great bee woman squatting on top, full control.
Time bomb woman sitting facing on a chair encourages slow penetration. Love triangle complex leg setup for varied angles. One pincer man holds woman's legs open, more control, anal access mentioned.
Tilted missionary pillow under hips, leg variations for G-spot. Snake trap seated facing, V-shaped legs, often shallower penetration. Spooning sex, side lying, comfortable G-spot and options.
Serpent's embrace, face down, pillow under hips, G-spot focus. Row his boat woman straddling facing, rocking motion. Wow him powwow like Yab-Yum, but with rocking.
Sofa spread eagle, woman standing on sofa edge, man standing facing, hot seat man kneeling behind, woman kneeling, G-spot access via hip swivel, and get down on a Yab-Yum with synchronized breath and pelvic rocking.
Phew. Yeah, quite the list. Lots of options to explore different sensations and connections.
Definitely provides variety. Okay, last big section, chapter 9, orgasm.
The peak experience. The guide defines it, talks about the words origin, to swell, and its spiritual view in Tantra aiming for longer, more integrated orgasms.
And it distinguishes between multi-orgasms, several peaks with breaks, and the long tantric orgasm, one extended wave.
Right. It says preference is personal, but Tantra can help achieve both.
For female orgasm, the guide stresses the mind's role overcoming negativity and the complexity of the CUV system.
Clitorethrovaginal system, yeah. It differentiates explosive orgasms, more genital, lower chakra, maybe draining from implosive ones.
Implosive being more whole body, upper chakras, feeling integrated.
That's the idea. More fulfilling, perhaps. And it emphasizes clitoral stimulation is key for most women. Penetration alone often isn't enough.
It mentions the G-spot again, part of the clitoral network, that come here motion.
And the possibility of cervical uterine orgasm from deep penetration stimulating nerves around the cervix.
Okay. And for male orgasm, specifically prolonging it, the advice is kind of, don't try so hard.
Counterintuitive, yeah. Focus on the present moment, relaxation, not fixating on lasting longer. Breath control is key here.
Slow, deep breaths, maybe holding the breath sometime.
Exactly, slowing down arousal. And then there's the PC muscle, pelvic floor muscle, Kegels.
Learning to control ejaculation by practicing contractions like stopping urine flow.
That's how you find the muscle, yeah. Then practice regularly.
And it mentions pompoir, a female-led technique.
Yeah, the kabza or Singapore kiss. The woman uses vaginal contractions to stimulate a passive male partner. Takes practice, maybe tools like yoni eggs. It describes squeezing, contracting, pushing, pulling, twisting motions.
Wow, okay. And general tips for longer or multiple orgasms for anyone?
Stay calm near the peak, slow down the pace, breathe calmly, engage pelvic muscles to kind of hold and extend the pleasure.
So wrapping it all up, the guide really paints Tantric sex as being way more about mindset, energy awareness, and deep connection than just mechanics.
Absolutely. It requires real self-awareness and tuning into your partner. It's a practice.
And it takes time, right? The guide emphasizes patience. Don't expect perfection straight away.
Definitely not. It's a journey of exploration, individually and together. The value is in that process, slowing down, discovering.
Yeah. It really makes you think, doesn't it? After covering all this, the history, the spirituality, the energy, the connection, what part of Tantra, as this guide lays it out, really lands for you personally right now? Maybe something for listeners to ponder too. How does this richer view challenge or confirm their own ideas about intimacy and pleasure? There's clearly so much more beneath the surface.